Hello, everyone. Slowly getting more attendees. Bonjour tous. Welcome to the Housing and Webinar series. Today's topic, and our first in this series, is housing and health. My name is Piotr Borislawski, liaison agent for the housing dossier at the TQSOI, Table Quartier Sud-Ouest de Lille. Our webinars are being held within the context of our Housing for All project, with the first objective of facilitating and empowering the West Island community to share their knowledge of current housing issues. This will stimulate brainstorming and enable residents and local stakeholders to co-create solutions more diverse with more opportunities suitable for the West Island context. For more information, be sure to check out our website, housingforallwi.org. The link will be in the chat. And now I'd like to invite Alex, Housing Dossier Coordinator at the TQSOI, to say a few words. Alex will be working backstage to make sure everything goes smoothly and will be moderating the chat of the webinar.
Thanks, Piotr. So if things look a little different on Zoom today, it's because we're using Zoom's webinar format, which means that you can only see and hear the panelists and our moderator, Piotr. Unlike a regular Zoom meeting, you are not able to see yourselves or the other attendees. And one of the main Zoom functions that you'll be using today as attendees is the chat, which you can access by clicking on the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. In the chat, you can type up any questions you might have that come up during the webinar. Please note that if you'd like your questions to appear to all panelists and attendees, which we encourage, you'll have to select the all panelists and attendees in the drop-down menu in the chat once you have it opened up. Also, feel free to ask your questions in French. So when we do get to the Q&A portion of the webinar later on, I'll be reading the questions that are in the chat out loud. At that time, you'll also have the option to virtually raise your hand by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. You can then ask your question out loud yourself once we give you the chance to speak. Don't worry, we'll go over these instructions again later when we get to the Q&A portion. Finally, we encourage you all to stay with us for the length of the webinar today. After the panelists close their discussion, we'll have the Q&A period, and we'll also be leaving some minutes at the end for you to fill out a short evaluation form. And please note that today's webinar is being recorded. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Housing is one of the best researched social determinants of health. Affordable housing interventions for low-income residents have been found to improve health outcomes and decrease healthcare costs. The availability of high-quality affordable homes enables people to spend a greater share of their household income on nutritious food, healthcare expenditures, and other essentials that promote good health. But out of curiosity, what maximum percentage of your income do you think you should spend on housing before it starts to affect your everyday budgeting for essentials like quality food, healthcare, and transportation? Let us know through the poll. We'll give everyone 1 minute to respond. Okay, so everyone's pretty correct. According to the Government of Canada's definition of housing affordability, no more than 30% of a household's income should be spent on housing needs. Housing affordability also allows young adults, families, and seniors to achieve greater residential stability, reducing the stress and the disruptions associated with frequent or unwanted moves, and providing a platform for individuals with chronic illness and other conditions to receive that needed healthcare. In this way, high quality affordable housing in safe neighborhoods can generate important psychological and mental health benefits. And today, we're here to discuss just that, how housing and health are connected. But before we start, let me introduce our panelists. For our first panelist, we have Marie-France Junot, Executive Director at Nova West Island, a winner of the Canada 150 Community Award in Education and Healthcare. Marie-France has been in the field of nursing for 35 years. At Nova, the delivery of high-quality healthcare has been a cornerstone for over 109 years, with experienced, caring, and dedicated staff and volunteers working together to improve the quality of life for vulnerable adults, youth, and families across the West Island. Their mission is to address the unmet needs of the communities through the development and delivery of professional and innovative health services. Next, we have Tamara Valancourt, Project Agent at WIA, the West Island Association for Intellectually Handicapped, for the Future Initiative, a program designed to help families plan for the future and well-being for their dependent children. Tamara has firsthand experience seeing her clients struggle with housing accessibility. As an organization, WIA strives to enhance the lives of people with an intellectual disability or autism, to provide support to their families, and to maintain and develop innovative services and to sensitize the community. Founded in 1958 by parents looking to build a better community for their children, WIA has since been built and developed a VAWA residence in 1973, a home with residential services for 9 adults struggling with intellectual disabilities and autism. Finally, but not least, we also have Michelle Hott, the community perspective of mental health, also known as PCSM. As the housing coordinator for the organization, Michelle has a background in correctional intervention and experience with homelessness initiatives with other organizations. With PCSM's long list of clients, Michelle helps to ensure that they have adequate resources and access to affordable housing. PCSM is dedicated to helping people with mental health problems achieve their fullest potential while meeting the challenges of everyday living within their community. Through a personalized relationship founded on mutual respect and trust, individuals receive the support they need to improve their quality of life. Thank you all for joining us today and for taking the time to discuss housing and health. So let's dive right in and start with one general set question to set the stage. How are housing and health connected? Marie-France, why don't you start?
I think the first thing to realize is that it's a two-way street. Housing affects health and health affects housing. And what I mean by that is that if you live in an insalubre, unsanitary environment, this will definitely affect your health. And if you're somebody with limited cognitive functioning or physical mobility or autonomy independence issue, that will have an impact on the type of housing that you can prevail yourself of. You've mentioned, Piat, that the physical environment or housing is a social determinant of health, but so is education and literacy, your social supports, social network, your level of employment, your income. So all of those things are closely interrelated and in turn affect housing as well. So all the social determinants of health affect housing, in my humble opinion. And then finally, the nurse in me wants to just speak up and say that the medical model always says that health is the absence of illness, it's the absence of disease. For nurses, health is when your biopsychosocial needs are met. So if you don't have adequate housing, your biopsychosocial needs are most likely not fully met or partially or in total. So it's very important that we look at the holistic picture when we take care of people, clients, patients, members, call them whatever, and look at the whole person in terms of providing person-centered care. So that's my take on things.
Tamara, what do you think? What do you think impacts housing and the health of that?
So I'm going to really speak on behalf of the population I work with, those with intellectual disabilities and autism. And like Marie-France mentioned, I do think that it is one of those vicious cycles. It's not just health affecting housing, it's not just housing affecting health. We often, speak about housing causing health issues, but often the reverse is true with our population. their diagnosis themselves can actually limit their accessibility to housing, adequate housing. And it is important to mention that accessibility to adequate housing and appropriate housing are actually one of the main issues that this population is facing with right now. There has been a movement in the system of support with our population. Up until the mid 80s, the individuals with intellectual disabilities and autism were often institutionalized, which were entirely funded by the government. And though a very flawed system, often causing health issues of their own, at least it did not become a financial burden on families. Now this did shift in the mid 80s to a more community-based natural home environment system where individuals are living within the natural home environments or community living family type resources. However, there is very limited funding in this system, and there also isn't enough of it. And so this is also, causing a huge issue with our population because even once they're in the public system, in one of these family type resources or intermediary type resources, the system is set in place where they're actually spending about 90% of their income on housing and room and board, as we like to speak. So housing and food alone. And so this does not cover any of the costs for transportation, leisure, clothing, haircuts, anything like that. And so like your poll mentioned, and everyone was in fair agreement that we should be spending 30% on housing alone, these individuals are spending about 90. And so our system is not set in place to be sustainable, to be healthy for these individuals. And so that just kind of sets in place a system of financial burden, financial stress on the families, on the individuals, which causes anxiety, depression, lots of different areas of health issues. Not only that, we also have the caregivers, the families themselves, often facing a lot of health issues themselves. So yeah, I think that it is a very convoluted answer, lots of different areas to explore, but our population is highly impacted by housing, I think.
That's a good point. Michelle, what about you and your clients that you're dealing with? Do you see that connection?
Yes, absolutely. Well, housing, my experience has been, it's a fundamental need, and there's a shortage of. Being that they're on a limited income, it's very difficult to find affordable housing, let alone adequate. They often say you get what you pay for, and that's been pretty much the case for the most part. Studios are hard to find in the West Island. And I would say a high majority of our clients that do come to me for housing are single, perhaps because maybe 4.5s, 5.5s are more available. I'm not sure, but that seems to be a big issue. They go very quick when they are available. And I would say the prices this year have really taken a dive. Used to be able to get a studio for $500, and now they're like $750, $800 for a one room, not even a bedroom, So aside from being limited in their funding, they also run into other difficulties as well. I mean, their physical, mental health, everything is affected, as everyone's mentioned. And naturally, they're struggling with mental illness as well. So stress, anxiety is definitely,
and they need that stability, right?
Challenging.
Yeah. Do you notice that stability does help when it comes to your clients?
Absolutely, absolutely. And whenever it's threatened or compromised, I can see they start, they're destabilized at that point, as any of us would be. If you found out tomorrow that you were going to lose your job and, the thought of losing your home or your apartment and so forth, the majority of my clients that do come to me are generally in a crisis of some sorts, whether it's, a divorce, a death, in a family, or, they're living with parents who are now being, placed in a residence. And if, there's quite a few of my clients who've never even lived on their own. So it's challenging for sure.
Okay, interesting. Then why are health connections often missed in conversations about housing? Why is it not talked about when you talk about health? Tamara, would you want to start that off?
Well, for this specific population, that being individuals with intellectual disability and autism, housing conversations often only revolve around availability of housing in itself. And so not necessarily looking in the facts of the specific needs of the individuals, their health conditions themselves, or anything like that. It is completely missed because we're looking at, well, what's available and how do we fit that just as the person. So we're putting the person in the place rather than finding a place for the person. So, yeah.
Mary-France, have you seen that? That connection?
Most definitely, because our primary mandate is taking care of cancer, ALS, palliative care patients. We also have the day center program for seniors with cognitive deficits like Alzheimer's, stroke, Parkinson's, etc. And what we've seen is healthcare establishments, healthcare professionals don't really take the time or have the time to discuss housing, and they discharge people home to previous living arrangements, whether they're appropriate or not. It's not necessarily part of the discharge plan. Hence the importance of what we do at NOVA, what our nurses do, what our home support workers do, as well as the CLSC nurses and home support workers. We're sort of the eyes and the ears in the community to see if people's needs are met. Again, biopsychosocial needs. And in addition to that, we often do preventative interventions such as trying to help the clients or patients adapt their homes for risk of falls, or reporting if we detect any signs of physical abuse or neglect. So the importance of community care, I think, is even more instrumental in making sure that people receive the care and services that they deserve.
That's interesting, because those are elements that go beyond affordability that people do need, don't they? Has anyone else seen those kind of elements that are very specific to your clients that they need that aren't there? Tamara, I'll start with again with you with those elements.
Yeah, absolutely. So with this population, we're looking at very specific needs that need to be addressed. We're looking at a set of expertise in terms of caregiving skills. We often have individuals who have sensory issues. So for example, the housing needs to not have natural light, whereas some apartment buildings only have the neon lights over the heads that might flicker and trigger anxiety, trigger different attacks, different emotions. And so just that physical space is often an issue, let alone the caregiver's expertise. And often there's roommate issues. Sometimes individuals would require their own space, yet they're forced to be sharing a room, which can often put them in emotional distress. And so there is definitely specific issues when we're looking at adequate housing. That's not just affordability, because there are quite a few individuals that we know of who can afford housing. There just aren't houses to actually, adequately serve their needs. And so it's really not just about the money issue that's really stopping us from providing adequate housing for this population.
Michelle, you mentioned that a lot of your clients are single. Do they end up looking for roommates, and is it difficult for them to find roommates?
Yeah, a lot of them do. I'm seeing more and more of that now because there is a shortage of studios. And also, depending on their needs, some need supervised setting, while others might need a group home. Others prefer to live alone, tend to do better living alone. So it's really based on individual needs, but I run into problems everywhere because there's just so many different challenges. One, they're limited income. So a lot of them come to me looking for low income housing. They want to get on the list. And I say a huge list, which can be anywhere between, I'd say 8 to 10 years, more so now with the COVID and all. and group homes as well, supervised housing, or, you know, even co-ops for that matter, there's a waiting list. It's, you know, anywhere from 2 years and up. Some of them, I've never even known of them to even have an opening since I started. So it's been 7 years. So it's just to give you an idea of how long a wait it can be. And now they work on a priority system. So I guess based on the fragility of the individual, you know, someone who's coming from conjugal violence, or, you know, single mom with children, or seniors, you know, will be bumped up naturally. But you can be at, you know, 200 and then go up to 230, and, you know, it could kind of fluctuate like that, you know. I mean, you could be down to 10 and, you know, wait another 3 years. So it's, I don't know how realistic it is. I know a lot of clients come to me thinking, you know, I want to apply for low income housing, and, you know, sometimes I guess they're just misinformed. And unfortunately, I got to break, you know, the bad news.
With your clients though, what are the specific elements are they looking for that they need to have in their housing situation?
Yeah, well, because a lot of them suffer from depression, anxiety, and so forth. So, I mean, natural light, of course. And unfortunately, a lot of the studios are basement apartments, you know, so they feel kind of boxed in, and they're already isolated. And so that just worsens their symptoms. Also, I would say social activities to break the isolation, transportation, you know, the busing system should be in close proximity, you know, essential services, the pharmacy, the bank, the, you know, everything should be within hopefully walking distance. Many don't even have a bus pass for that matter, so can't afford one. So it just, for many, they don't see, you know, much hope for a better quality of life. You know, they're on that limited income, you know, for many for the rest of their lives. So this is as good as it gets, you know, and so it's really hard to motivate many of them, you know.
It's interesting.
Just before we move forward, sorry, I'd like to add on a comment that Michelle made about waiting lists. So within our system as well, we do have waiting lists, or we did up until just recently. We have members at Y who've been on the waiting list for upwards to 10 years, like you said, Michelle, as well, to find a placement for their child. So we actually have family members that are, you know, in their 80s and still fully caring for their dependent children, with they themselves are requiring extra support at this point. And they were recently told that there is no longer a waiting list. Now it's really only on a emergency case basis. And what's defined as an emergency isn't always considered the same for a family member. So for example, a family member losing autonomy because they're, you know, aging and have age-related issues is not considered an emergency. And so you have, you know, our families who are in their 80s with memory loss, with, you know, reduced autonomy, still fully caring for our population. And so those waiting lists are still quite an issue with our population as well.
Go ahead, Marie-France. Yeah.
So going back to waiting lists, clearly at NOVA, our cancer, ALS, and palliative care patients cannot be put on a waiting list. So we don't have a waiting list. Where we do see the impacts of waiting lists is with our seniors that attend our adult day centers. Seniors, again, living with cognitive deficits like Alzheimer's, dementia, stroke, Parkinson. And some of these clients have been on a waiting list for months or a year or two, sometimes waiting for an assessment or sometimes waiting for placement. And what I think needs to be said also is that has a huge impact on the caregiver's health. It's not just the member, the patients, clients themselves, it's also the caregivers who are struggling day to day and trying to find community resources like all of us, all of our organizations, to sort of palliate some of those needs. But we can't forget about the health of the caregivers in this equation on housing.
When one is waiting on a waiting list, where do they usually wait? Are they with other family members? Are they bunched together, overcrowded? What does that look like, Mary France?
Well, for our seniors with cognitive deficits, they live with their spouses or adult children. So that means that their spouses or adult children have to make a lot of concessions in their own personal lives, work lives, what have you, to take care of these folks. And often they're on a waiting list with the CLSC or the CIUS to be assessed by a social worker for, again, for placement, in terms of respite services or long-term placements, public versus private, etc. But those waiting lists can take their toll on our caregivers.
Tamar, do you see that? Do you see that your clients give up on the public system and go private? Is that
Absolutely, if they can. Of course, private does come with a cost, a financial cost that some of our families just can't afford. However, we do see a lot. We do have actually a few nonprofit organizations who are solely focused on providing housing for our population, such as Weary, the West Island residents, and Avatil, towards independent living, areas like that. However, it is unfortunately waiting lists still occur. And so in certain circumstances, we actually have individuals who are in the hospital just waiting in the long-term wing. No actual health issues per se, other than their diagnosis. So they're taking up beds for those who may actually need it, hospitals or even CHSLD. So often we have our 30-year-olds with, living in CHSLD for months at a time, just waiting for a family type resource. So it does happen quite often.
interesting? Okay, the waiting list is a very, very prominent issue, it seems, and there's no, the transition on when you get on those waiting lists, there isn't one. You just simply wait with, I presume, a suitcase waiting to be moved. Or do you think, do family members step in and take them into their homes? And then that's, I guess, the worst case scenario, right? That what if someone doesn't have a family to take care of? They kind of get lost in the cracks of the system, don't they? So, okay, moving on. Michelle, tell me about a story or a memorable moment or a client that you've had that is the most vulnerable that you've seen during the housing crisis that went and switches into a health crisis. Can you share a story like that?
Yeah, well, there's so many of them. I don't know which one to focus on, but I mean, I've seen a few places, homes condemned because, the living conditions were so bad. I had one client who, when I seen him, presented very well, and, he, everything on the surface appeared good, but we had heard from his brother who was out of town and wanted us to follow up with him because the house was in really bad, conditions, and that the city wanted to tear it down. So after meeting with them and so forth, I went to take, I took a little run over there and just to see how things were. And I remember him telling me, well, I don't know, maybe it's not a good idea. You come in, it's not too safe in there. And nothing really prepared me for walking in there, and it was just horrible, the living conditions. I mean, there was no running water. The toilet didn't work. Windows were broken. It was in the middle of winter. I mean, there was just clutter and stuff everywhere. Even like, the smell was just, well, I don't know how he had been living there, but there was just one place, in the middle of the room, so to speak, where his bed, I guess that's where he slept at night. And yet he was able to find something, on the floor, and he said, oh, I missed this. And I was like, oh my God, how could he see that, in the midst of everything in there, but he had been living like that for years. It was his family home. And, like I said, there was no heating, there was no heating, no water, no, and he would, go to Tim Hortons or something and kind of freshen up there, or drive to Dorval Airport, and clean up. And like I said, he was able to present well. I don't know how he managed But we managed to get him out of there, needless to say, and he did find himself a nice apartment he was happy with, thank God, but to think he must have been there for a good 15 years, living that way.
Have you had clients get evicted? And then where do they, like, does that happen? And where do
Clients get
they?
evicted? Absolutely. Yeah, there's been cases where stuff had been dumped right on the lawn, and social services had to make their way. CLSC, there's a number you can call, and they'll place, in case of emergencies, I guess, they'll place their furniture and stuff in storage.
And then where do they go? Yeah, where?
A shelter for the most part, I would say, and that's if there's an opening, because more and more now it's very, very difficult to even find a spot in a shelter. I mean, most often than not, they're sent off the island crisis center. We have that one. The women's shelter, like I said, since I started PC, they've never had an opening. It's always full. I wish we had a few more of them, but often what happens is they end up at the crisis center, and after, a week or so, if I'm not able to find something, then they'll go off to the other shelter that's off the island in Vaudreuil-Dorion, and they kind of do the circuit, and then from there they might find a place out in Montreal, and then they make their way back,
So they're in their car, doing the circuit.
Absolutely, it's like a, rotating door. Yeah, it's
So they're essentially
really problematic.
They're living in their car, and then they just try to find showers.
Oh yeah,
amenities.
I've had clients. It's and I mean, you're talking about people who had been working, lost their jobs, and lost everything. Eventually, they couldn't afford to pay storage, and then they owed them money, and they never bothered to go back and get their things, and they tried downsizing, so they just either leave it at the apartment and just grab whatever they can, and they end up renting a room somewhere. Because then they're not checking, their credit and so forth. It's the only way to bypass that, because if they have any issues at Demerged Logement, it's next to impossible. They're always doing a credit check. They want a deposit. They want good references, and if they're on disability, they want to know, oh, what type of disability, and then they start prying and asking questions, and and there's still a lot of discrimination out there, unfortunately. So,
yeah, because their health issues aren't getting better, and so when they approach a landlord, the landlord can visibly see they're distressed, and that probably affects how they get a house as well, or apartment.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Tamara, tell us a story. Where have you seen? Who are the most vulnerable that you've seen that in what's going on?
Yeah, so like Michelle said, there are many, many stories. It is hard to focus on only one because it is a general consensus that our families are struggling with housing accessibility for their dependent children. I can think of one family in particular who has a child with very severe needs who is just about to turn 18. And so the system right now is set you get a lot of support when you have a child with special needs. However, when that child becomes an adult, the system changes and the child is left to live their independent lives as much as possible. And so all of the specialized therapies stop, the respite services stop. A lot of different services will cease as soon as the child turns 18. And so parents are kind of racing against the clock when their child turns 18 to try to find, well, what is going to work for my child? How are we going to get those respite services? How are we going to get a place for them to live when we're no longer able to care for these children? So this one family in particular ended up experiencing a severe family crisis and had to hospitalize their child. And due to the system and everything like that, they weren't able to reintegrate him to their home. And so they were trying to find a placement, and the child ended up spending 3 months in the hospital. And then after those 3 months in the hospital, and this is a child who should be in school. This is a child who should be doing their leisure programs, socializing, being with their families. And our system just didn't allow for that. They were forced to stay in their hospital room for months. And then as soon as that They finally found a temporary placement called an intermediary resource. And then they were bounced from those resources for a couple of years until recently they were placed in a group home. And so this child who has, severe special needs is experiencing these, traumatic changes to his routine, to every aspect of his life got turmoiled because of this crisis, and our system just wasn't ready to support that. And so I think that was one of the most heart-wrenching stories that I've had experience recently, because there's very little that we can do on our end other than just be there to support the family in terms of providing referrals, resources, a ear to listen, but we can't themselves provide new houses, right? So we don't have that answer for them.
So your client's fear of getting old, essentially, because the services aren't there, right?
Yeah, exactly. If they're not in a specialized school, as soon as Sec 5 finishes, they're out in the real world in terms of work placement, in terms of post-secondary education. If they're in a specialized school, it's up until age 21, and after that, it's a whole new world of challenges. So
that's crazy. Let's talk about a little bit more about the health of aspects of it, because we want to know what happens when someone is in a precarious environmental housing situation. What happens to their health? Marie-France, I'm going to start with, because you've been 35 years nursing. What do you see? What happens with when a person's health when they get affected by precarious housing situations?
Well, one example that comes to mind is we had a lady who was diagnosed with ALS, which is neurodegenerative, and you have a life expectancy of 2 to 5 years at best. She had 2 sons that were very, very involved in her care, and they had to adapt the whole house in order to keep her at home because they were looking at her, her mental health, her psychological health, emotional health. She wanted to be home. They adapted the whole house, including the washroom, which cost tens of thousands of dollars. Unfortunately, they could not prevail themselves of the home adaptation program because by the time the occupational therapist did the home assessment, all the work had been done already. So the gentleman had a folder with all of his bills from the construction and renovations, and he was told that he could not be paid after the fact. He needed to apply beforehand, but these guys were very proactive taking care of mom. So sometimes people are living in a home, and from the outside you think everything's okay, but they were now house rich, cash poor, having spent all these monies on renovations. So we have to be careful, because I think there's a big misconception that in the West Island, everybody is rich and well-to-do and educated and knowledgeable about all the services and care that are available. And we see that that's not the truth. We're lucky that we live in a multicultural society. We have, I think it's 19 different cultural groups in the West Island. But for a lot of these folks, French or English is not their first language. So even to navigate the healthcare system, navigate housing system is very, very difficult. So I think that we need to have in place strategies to keep people in their existing home as long as possible, and to make the resources that are available in a timely fashion.
Interesting. Okay, then I'll lead to that question. That's a very interesting discussion there. Tamara, tell us about your residency and how does that work for your 9 clients?
So the Valois residence, like you mentioned at the beginning, opened in 1973, available for 9 permanent residents. And it also offers respite services to up to 10 families on weekends for dinners, little trips and everything like that. This concept is one of the most successful models that has been redone throughout the West Island. However, unfortunately is no longer a possibility due to grandfather laws and bylaw changes and system structures of how you want to zone buildings and everything like that. So I was very lucky to have been able to open this when they did. So 9 individuals, of course, not enough, but for those 9, I do think it provides quite a successful, healthy life where they're fully integrated into the community. As guessing a lot of people know that Valois Village in the Pointe Claire area is quite a close, tight-knit community where individuals kind of contribute to the community themselves. They're known. Everyone kind of says hi to each other. It is a really great place to be set. And this concept of a residence is really to ensure that we are respecting their independence as much as possible. We're enabling them to live as independently as possible while providing the support necessary for them to thrive.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's go ahead, Mary-France. Yeah.
Well, you had asked us to share success stories, and I mean, I have a couple of success stories where our nurses have gone into bi-generational or intergenerational homes. Where they keep a palliative client in their home with their adult children next door to help care for them and provide end-of-life care so people can die in their familiar environment, in their familiar surroundings, with their loved ones, comfortable, dignified, not in a hospital, on a hospital stretcher, beyond a curtain in an emergency room. But again, this is a success story, but the downfall is there's not that many intergenerational homes in the West Island, or the lands to expand on existing homes. But for people with intellectual handicaps, or probably even mental illnesses, those would be very decent living arrangements. But the feasibility, I'm not sure is there, but you had asked us, Piotr, to think out of the box, and if we had a crystal ball, what would we like? Well, we'd like more of those.
What about you, Michelle? If you had a crystal ball and you wanted no money, no object, what would you consider a healthy house for your clients?
Oh my God. Geez. Well, something spacious, maybe close to the water, and where it's got social activities. They have maybe nice garden, and I don't know. Wow.
Yeah, I know, right? Like,
yeah, I'm just trying to think what else. We're just, maybe have even on-site support, because I know a lot of them, that's the case. They do need some kind of assistance and stuff, but for the most part, yeah, it would be something that would be not only affordable, but adequate, good living conditions, spacious, bright, airy, just peaceful, quiet, and where they can, I guess, become more autonomous.
Exactly, but also have those amenities.
They need, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those amenities
all the amenities that I had mentioned before as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. Tamara, what do you think? What is your dream healthy house? Tell me. Obviously, Valois Residence is great, but I'm building off of that. What else would you add?
So Valois Residence is great, like you said, but it is limited to 9 people, and we have countless of people calling on a weekly basis saying, "Is there a place? Is there a place?" So of course I would want more of it. And I think Valois is set for a specific niche of our population. I think there's a wide spectrum of level of ability, limitation, needs when working with this population. So I'd really want a model that would kind of work for everyone, while tailored to their needs as well. So certain people have a high level of independence and just need, that structure of support in case, whereas other individuals might need constant support. And we really want to set up a structure or a community where everyone could kind of help each other out. I love that communal living aspect of the ideas when we're talking about in housing committee areas and everything like that. I think that would be wonderful to also provide them with an opportunity to contribute to their house, to their home, to their community. I think often the way our system is set is that people are caring for them, but our population have so much to give, are willing to do so much, and never take anything for granted, and they really just want to contribute. And so providing that opportunity, enabling that, to make it a reality for them, I think would be amazing.
Okay, then let me try to pitch you an idea. Could doctors prescribe housing? Is that something that could happen? And nurses, instead of having a bottle of pills, is there an opportunity there to have doctors say, well, no, we're not going to give you antidepressants. We're going to actually look into your housing situation. Do you think there's a future for that, Michelle? What do you think?
I think that'd be a great idea.
Yeah.
A good place to start for sure, because I don't think it's like usually when I guess a client or a patient shows up at the hospital, you know, it's often whether it's a physical ailment or it's, you know, they're feeling stressed or anxious, depressed, and they don't always tie it with housing. You know, it's usually one of the last things they kind of inquire about. So yeah, I think that could be a good place to start, make it part of the evaluation and process, make it a bigger priority. Absolutely.
What do you guys think about then what we're learning from COVID right now? Do you think the pandemic has taught us to have better shelters? Because obviously now everyone's staying in their shelter, everyone's grasping and no one's leaving anywhere. Do you think COVID will help with that housing issue?
I think COVID has shed a light on the most vulnerable in our society in terms of looking out for one another and caring for one another. So, you know, identifying those vulnerable people, caring for them. It also has shed light, unfortunately, on the poor senior care that our society has become infamous for. And then one of the concerns that we have is sometimes if you have a senior living with a cognitive deficit, they've been married to their spouse for 60 years, comes a time where there's caregiver burnout, the house is no longer appropriate for them, but the option is for them to be placed in two separate residences. And in my mind, that should not be an option. The option should be that they would go into one residence. Some do offer it, but it's more the exception than the rule. So, so again, with COVID, it's shed light, I think, on a number of senior issues that have been sort of swept under the rug because seniors, it's not sexy to take care of seniors or intellectually handicapped people or cancer people, you know. So, so anyway, so I think that we need to sort of relook, you know, look at housing in terms of what is needed. Like we need more long-term care facilities with all the baby boomers. We need more intergenerational options. But we also need to look at what's in existence and how we can adapt those houses, because some people are very attached to their land or their house on the water side, and there's got to be something to be done so that we can keep people at home longer. And that's why organizations like all of us, that's what we do. We keep people longer at home.
Tamara, what have you seen during the pandemic that's really it's really changed?
I think what's really interesting is the fact that we've structured our adequate housing or idea of adequate housing on certain physiological needs. Whereas when we are all quarantined, all put into our lockdown aspects, I think other areas of housing kind of come out, other areas of need. So, you know, it's not just like when you're forced to be at home for 24 hours a day. You can, in our case, where our all of our participants were no longer going to their schools or no longer going to their work placements or anything like that, they were at home. So what can they do? Right? So a lot of them were just watching TV, if they had a TV, right? Of course. And so that aspect of, well, what can a home have to really increase that quality of life? Whereas I think that kind of shed light onto it, because before we were just like, well, does it cover your needs? Does it give you a warm bed, some, you know, a roof over your head? Whereas I think now we may need a little more from our housing, from our homes.
Yeah.
We're talking about amenities that need to be close. Michelle, can you be more specific on what kind of amenities those need to be, especially during COVID when they shouldn't be hopping on public transportation? They should just go directly to their amenity. What do they specifically need, do you think?
Well, of course, every individual is different once again, but I would say all the essential services, I mean, close to maybe their GP, the hospital.
Can you explain what a GP is?
Oh, general practitioner.
Okay.
You know, or their psychiatrist, you know, if they're attending any kind of social program, day center, whether it be the gym or swimming and, different activities, access to, their bank and, the supermarkets and so forth. Of course, transportation, once again, is important. And those who have mobility problems, unable to walk, have transport adapté services put in place. What else?
Well, that's a good list, because that's exactly what like a community like the 15-minute walkable neighborhood community needs to have. And West Island, unfortunately, because we're so spread out, those amenities have become very, very valuable. And now the real estate around those amenities have gone up, of course, even more, especially with the demand for it from the next generation of healthcare services. So it's very interesting that in people with the worst situations when it comes to mental health, disabilities, and healthcare are the ones that need it the most, and they're not accessible, unfortunately. And they're being priced out even more. And that's something that in the future of the West Island is going to be an issue, because they are building more clinics in smaller areas and pockets of neighborhoods, but that access is still not affordable, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
I have clients that will turn away a place simply because it's too far to get to a bus, and come winter, they would be completely isolated there. So for them.
All right. So, well, thank you very much, guys. This has been a great discussion, because it's really given us an idea of like the perspectives that aren't really visible in the West Island. You don't see this every day. You don't see the seniors in the homes, like you said, Mary France, who need those amenities. So it's very tricky to distinguish and share those experiences. So thank you very much for sharing that. It's been a really interesting discussion. So now we've reached the Q&A portion of the webinar. And so let's see what kind of questions the attendees have asked us. Alex, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so we have some great comments and questions in the chat. So I just like to remind everyone to type any questions that they might have in the chat, which once again, you can access by clicking on the chat button that appears at the bottom of your screen. So I'll be reading some of the questions and comments that we have there out loud. And remember that you also have the option to click the raise hand button at the bottom, and I can then let you ask your question out loud yourself. So I'm going to start from the top. Let's see, we have more of a comment from Paulette, who says that my great concern are seniors living in private senior residences. They are not supervised by community organizations nor government officials. It is a neglected, huge segment of our population who have the same problems as those living autonomously in our community. There is abuse and other needs provided outside of their four walls. They are isolated and forgotten. So I think that comment definitely joins some of the things that were said today. I don't know if any of the panelists have something to add or any reactions to that comment.
Yeah, it seems like private isn't also a solution, is it? Okay, continue, yeah.
Yeah, next we have a question from Camille. Avez-vous des clients ou clientes qui expérimentent ou ont expérimenté une situation d'itinérance en raison de leurs enjeux de santé? So do you have any clients that might have gone through moments of homelessness because of their health issues?
Does anyone want to start with that one?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I've had a lot of clients that ended up homeless simply because of their mental health, their physical health as well. It just didn't know where to get support or help. And often it's them ending up hospitalized where they start getting, the need and their needs met at that point. Because usually they're not released from the hospital until they have, housing set up. So either they're released at a crisis center or I'll get a phone call, unless they're going back home, of course, to their previous residence. But usually if they come in and are homeless, they won't release them until there's, you know, something put in place. So
Yeah.
it's often where I get our referrals from. Yeah.
For my population, often it falls with the higher functioning. When I say higher functioning, there's this spectrum of levels of independence, and those who have a high level of independence but may need limited amounts of support often fall between the cracks and are living independently and may experience job loss, not be able to pay rent or anything like that, and be evicted from their homes, not necessarily know where to reach out for resources, and often will, I say often, seldom, but in those cases will often end up experiencing homelessness due to that. There's just this misconception of everyone knows the rules, you have to pay rent, this is how you have to do it, this is how our structure, our society works. And for those who may struggle with either understanding it or being able to actually follow those set rules, I think that they end up falling between the cracks.
Thank you for your answers. We have another question from Camille. I love how you talked about the biopsychosocial needs and actually look into not only getting an apartment by finding the proper apartment with all other included needs. My question, how do neighborhoods support accessibility, transport, services, etc., affect the choice when it comes to finding proper housing? So I think this is a great question, and I think we once again talked about it a little today, right? Like how it goes beyond the home itself, but where that home is located and what kind of services are included with that home and what kind of amenities it's close to. Was there something else that we wanted to add on that point?
Go ahead, Marie-France.
A couple of our nurses have mentioned that it's again, not just the housing, but the neighborhood and community support. I'll give you two concrete examples. Two gentlemen, both living in Dollard des Ormeaux, both on chemo and radiation therapy. And even though they're able to drive around their vicinity and get to the pharmacy and get to their doctor's appointments and the grocery store, one of them is unable to take out his recycling and garbage bins. He's just, it's too physically demanding.
Yeah.
And then the other one says clearing is the snow and sleet and ice. I mean, the Quebec winter stuff, it's very, very difficult for them. And they've tried to locate, teenagers in their neighborhoods, but they live in older neighborhoods where their older neighbors are seniors themselves. So they find themselves really sort of isolated from that point of view, and in the winter trapped in terms of what they can do and what they can access in terms of their basic needs.
Have you seen seniors move specifically to neighborhoods that are catered to their needs, or like near a hospital? Have you seen those kind of situations?
I think that when people move, it's because they've reached the end of their rope, and I'm not talking about their financial rope necessarily, but there's nobody to help them out. Or often what we find in Quebec is with the brain drain, there's a lot of our seniors that are living here alone with their adult children out of province or out of country. So people make those decisions to move, not necessarily because they can't take care of their house on the inside, but there's all the outside stuff as well that needs to be addressed.
Interesting.
Okay, thank you, Marie-France. I really like how you took that question and brought it beyond just the amenities, right? But also social needs of people and how that needs to be considered in living situations as well. So we have a comment here from Paulette, who says, with the closure of Maison Héron, seniors will be transferred to God knows where, and it seems that no one is truly fighting this. The Minister of Health refuses to give or buy the residents from the owners because of what happened. That seems to be a reckless decision. Does anyone have any reactions to Paulette's comment?
I'm just curious where those seniors are going to go that are now that we're in Maison Héron. Like, that's a discussion. There are, like we said, there are no waiting lists. There are waiting lists, sorry, and everyone's already filled to the brim. So I'm very curious where they're going to go, those seniors.
Absolutely, and whether they're going to be able to stay within their communities, right?
Yeah.
So we have a Question from Jennifer Coons from Assistance Communautaire d'Orval. This is more of a direct question, I think, for you, Michelle. Is it possible to get the emergency storage phone number for the CLSC that you mentioned earlier? Jennifer, maybe I can put you in contact with Michelle through email, and you can share that information. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. We also have a comment from Kemi, a reaction to what you said, Michelle. I've experienced firsthand this dynamic of doing the shelter rounds Michelle is talking about as a social intervener in shelters. It is very real and recurrent.
Michelle, how much time do you think you spend doing those kinds of rounds? Is it every week, every day?
Well, less now, of course, because of the COVID, but before that, it was every day. I was always on the road, rarely in the office, now working from home, but which is, you know, difficult, of course, because the only way I could really help is by providing listings or trying to make some calls and setting it up and putting it in place, but it's a lot more challenging. But yeah, before 5 days a week, I was on the road, always. Yeah, rarely in the office, which was frustrating because I was trying to find time in my day to make calls, return phone calls. And, you know, I was working alone. Now I have a little more support, so which is wonderful. But yeah.
Okay. Paulette says, Montreal has made arrangements with a hotel at Complexe des Jardins for the homeless this winter. Do we have an arrangement on the West Island for one of the hotels? Ajoie Ricochet has received $200,000 for an 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. warm shelter from December 1st to the end of March. But we need a 24-hour reliable living condition for the West Island homeless population. I see some nodding, especially from you, Michelle.
Yeah, absolutely. Because last year, I mean, you're saying as of December 1st, and I'm just thinking last year, right before Christmas, oh my God, it was terrible. There was no shelters, had any openings, and I was getting calls, and, you know, I was hearing people in great distress and really nowhere to go, you know, and I'm just hoping, I don't know what this winter is going to be like, but it's, anyways, I know there's a few places opening up. I was reading in the Old Port as well. They're going to be opening something like 300 and something in a big hall, you know, for the homeless. That'll be available as well. So mind you, most of our clientele don't want to go down, you know, downtown. They prefer to stay on the West Island, but I'm happy to hear that Ajoie has something in place. But it would be nice if we had something else as well, for sure. 24 hours is necessary.
Thanks, Michelle. We have a question here from Margaret. What has been the response by demerged cities in the West Island to the need for affordable supported housing? I don't know if our panelists can directly answer that question. Maybe you have some comments though with regards to you know, demerged cities in the West Island and their role in getting affordable supported housing. If not, it's sort of related to the next question that we have in the chat from Kemi, which is, who are your best allies when it comes to housing problems or solutions for your clients in the West Island? Could it be elected officials, the CIUS, community organizations, or other?
Best allies.
All of the above.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it really depends on what avenue you want to go with. Of course, the private or the public or the nonprofit, I think you'll have different allies for each. The CIUS, as part of the West Island, is the Centre de Réadaptation de l'Ouest de Montréal, so CROM. So they in itself have their system of housing. So of course, we're allies with them in terms of you know, referring individuals, getting them access to resources. And then they were actually funding our Valois residents up until, I believe it has been 15 years that the funding got cut, to no fault of theirs. I don't want to cause any ruffled feathers. I think funding cuts, they had to make decisions, and that's where the nonprofits kind of took the the wind and kind of ran with it, I guess we'll say. So yeah, so we still work very closely with the CIUS. Elected officials are always there to advocate for the needs, which I think is really important. So making them aware of the situation, making it a priority for them is something that I feel is really important, because they are strong advocates and they can kind of support the cause. And of course, community organizations, I think we all have to rely on each other and support each other.
But do you see some cities doing it better than others in the sense of support or access to information? Like something simple like access to information. Are there areas in West Island that are doing it better than others? No, everyone's doing it poorly. No, I'm kidding. But I'm sure, like, for example, Point Claire does have a lot of resources and a lot of community organizations that interlink with each other and that share that information.
Yeah, I do think that there has been a shift recently, especially working with the cities. I think that there is a new openness that there wasn't before. Maybe because of COVID, people are, the elected officials are kind of reaching out, what are the needs of the population, looking at that. So I think that there is a new openness and willingness to work together.
That's the silver lining, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I wouldn't say there's one city over another right now, because I do feel like that's it's growing in popularity of like of models of way to work with the community.
Yeah.
So another comment that we have from Kate, it was more in response to another comment in the chat, but it's I think it's an important comment to mention nevertheless. It's about intergenerational housing, or even infill housing, to allow for more independent living on the same lot. I think that kind of goes back to what you said, Marie-France, about it being beyond the individual home, but who lives in that home with you, or what kind of community do you have around you in terms of like a social network and social support. So that, I think, is a good maybe way to think about it going forward. And then this is another comment based on something that you said, Marie-France. It says, hospital, from Kate, hospital, CLSC workers, doctors, social workers need to assess individuals in a holistic way. Housing is one, but also nutrition, general health, access to services like food security and transportation, access to a support network, etc. There has to be a team approach.
That's true. That's true.
And here we have a question from Dylan for Tamara. So Dylan, as the coordinator of La Maison de l'Autisme, a nonprofit that has a housing project for adults on the spectrum, what is your opinion the biggest obstacle to creating specialized housing for people on the spectrum?
So of course, I'm going to limit it to the West Island as an area, just because I do know that cities have different bylaws and different zoning issues. And I don't think that there's one biggest obstacle with providing, specialized housing. I do think zoning is a huge issue when it comes to providing even land to be able to build these homes with. So for example, just recently, the city of Point Claire unfortunately denied access to a change in zone to have multiple individuals living within the home itself to create a residence. So like I had mentioned, our Valois residence is grandfathered and so is allowed to have 9 residents. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case with the city of Point Claire. You cannot build homes like that anymore. And so that is a huge obstacle, something that is still, people are still advocating to change, but as it stands right now, that is a large obstacle. Funding is also an issue as well. Of course, if you're looking at different nonprofits, I know Wyatt in itself is not looking to expand their residential services in terms of creating a different residence. But for example, the organization like Weary has a few homes and was looking to build another one, made an offer to build it and then was rejected due to funding issues. So that is also a huge obstacle as well, as that funding aspect. And then of course, providing that specialized home, I don't think that there is one model that fits all. I think that there's a definite wide spectrum and a niche for everyone. And so, that in itself is an obstacle as well. I could speak more, but
Well, it sounds like, political will and the municipal regulatory framework is one of the obstacles you mentioned. And then the other one obviously is funding, which
Yeah,
is,
absolutely. And I also want to mention, because I don't want Point Claire to feel like they were pointed out there, it is experienced throughout these cities. It's not only Point Claire that does this. Of course, zoning is an issue everywhere.
right. And what about, is there any kind of community pushback when it comes to developing these housing projects? Do you see that sometimes there might be, a lack of understanding when it comes to the needs of some of the clients that Waya has, and the kind of, like, what it means to basically have that kind of housing in neighborhoods?
Absolutely. I think that there's a huge stigmatization with our population. Just out of, I think Michelle has also experienced this. I think the population in general, due to lack of education, may have, generalizations or stigmatizations for the individuals, and may have hesitations to wanting to open their community doors to them. I do think that our population in itself doesn't have it as much as maybe Michelle's population. Because our population isn't necessarily associated with violence and mental health issues as much as, for example, Michelle. So maybe Michelle, you can comment on that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, well, that is, you said it pretty much in a nutshell. We do experience a lot of discrimination there for that reason, for fear of, their safety, I know in Kirkland, we had like 2 homes residents, housing about 6 to 8 clients, and they were shut down. And part of the reason was they didn't like, there was a lot of, I guess, turnover, different people, residences, coming and going type of thing. And it be very uncomfortable. And eventually they shut them down. And I know they had a big meeting there, the city, and, had approached a few of the politicians and asked, because they had been also threatened that if they didn't shut down, they could pay a serious fine. So it was, breaking the bylaws and so forth, which I didn't even know there was such a thing, but apparently so. You can't even, apparently in Kirkland, you can't even rent a room out. So I said, well, what happens if you own a house and your partner, your husband, is just, passes away, and you can no longer pay your mortgage, and you want to rent a room or 2 out to help pay the mortgage, it helps them, it helps us, it helps everybody, everyone's happy. But apparently not. And they said that the reason being is that they were getting too much heat from the community. So it's really the community at large that has a real impact. So I guess maybe, trying to educate more the community and,
Raising awareness.
Right.
Absolutely.
I would like to comment on the positive. I think that the West Island is a very accepting community compared to maybe some others. I do feel like I get a lot of positive remarks and a lot of individuals who will come to want to volunteer at Waya because they saw us out in the community and it seemed like an amazing group and they wanted to get involved. So I do want to give props to the West Island community. I do feel like we are a welcoming community in general.
Yeah, it's a good way to see the positive side. Absolutely, Tamara. And I think that we have a comment here from Sheila that is also talking about how, Point Claire has some good programs. She says, I think Point Claire and its Aid for Seniors program has been a strong support for seniors to retain autonomy in their home. But even in Point Claire, the lack of affordable housing and graduated housing stocks such as shared housing are needed everywhere. So that's the last comment that we have in the chat for now. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask or any comments they'd like to make? Yeah, can you see the raised hands? Unfortunately, I don't think I have that option on my end.
No, I see it on the participants list, and no one has raised their hand. No raised hands, no.
Great.
Oh, wait. We got Sheila Larson here. Give me 1 second. I'll allow her to talk.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sheila.
I had come in with a very late second posting, and I just thought it was worth saying it out loud, and that is shame on our municipal councils for being so close to housing people with special needs. This shows that we need to publicize this issue far and wide and loud. We don't want gated or selective communities, and our zoning bylaws should reflect that. And then I went on to say, if we can house a cannabis plant, which we have in Point Claire, why can't we allow diversity in our housing for people? So maybe that's something for us to end with, that gives us a charge for action.
Yes, exactly.
Sheila.
Thank you, Sheila.
Well said.
Yeah, and we're taking down, just so everyone knows, all your questions, all your comments. We're going to be recording them and keeping them and thinking about them as we go forward with our project and with these webinars. So with the time that we have left, well, I first of all wanted to thank you all for your questions today and thank the panelists for your insights. But before you go, we'd very much appreciate everyone's feedback on today's webinar. So there's a link that I'll put in the chat to a quick evaluation form. And, you know, I'd like to invite you to click on the link right now and fill it out. Evaluation forms are very helpful for us to know how we did and how to improve. And they can also help you take stock of your own thoughts about today's webinar. So thank you so much. And I'll be putting that up in the chat right away.